Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and welcome to my May, June, and July reading wrap up. I haven't done one of these in 3 months, so we have 3 months of books to review today. As you saw in my previous clip, I collected all the books for these 3 months and we have quite a few books to review. I have three pretty decent sized stacks, so let's not waste any time and let's get into the wrap up. During the month of May, I read 10 books and that was a total of 3,609 pages. Of those 10 books, one was a fantasy, 6 were romance, 2 general fictions, and 1 dark romance. Okay, the first book I read in May was Wild and Wrangled by Lila Sage, and this is the fourth and final book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. This one follows Cam and Dusty. It's their story. This is a second chance, and essentially what happens is Cam and Dusty had a relationship back in the day, but Dusty had left town for a little while, and in the meantime, Cam actually started dating somebody else and got engaged to them. And the book starts with Cam's wedding day, where her current fiance actually stands her up and he doesn't show up to the wedding. So basically, she's not getting married anymore. There's some major angst and pining, and the one that got away vibes from Dusty. A lot of tension between the two main characters. It's basically kind of like a forced proximity as well, because she ends up moving into a house where he's kind of like the groundskeeper for the area and they live in like kind of close proximity and they end up reconnecting. I really love this one. I think this is my favorite one in this entire series, but it is such a good ending to the entire series. And I'm so sad that this series is over, but I do know that Lila Sage is coming out with a new book later in the year as well, so I'm very excited about that. But I ended up rating this one 5 stars. It was my favorite one in the series. I absolutely loved it, and I had the best time with this entire series, and especially this book. So that's the first book that I read in May. Then the next book I read was Arrogant Devil by R.S. Gray, and this one follows Meredith, who leaves her rich husband. I think she lived in California, and she was like married to this rich guy. He ends up cheating on her, and she ends up leaving him in the middle of the night. She didn't even pack a suitcase. She just left in the middle of the night with just the clothes on her back, and she ran away to Texas where her sister lives, hoping that her sister would like take her in, but her sister was out of town, and unfortunately she doesn't really have anywhere to stay, and she has no job, and she doesn't really have any money. So her sister actually hooks her up at her current employer's ranch as like the maid in the house. I don't actually remember exactly what her job was, but he also set her up with a little shack on the property. This is definitely a dislike to love situation, because he's a very grumpy cowboy, and he's not impressed with her because he thinks she's just like a spoiled rich girl who doesn't really know how to do anything for herself. And I actually thought that he was actually pretty mean to her in the beginning. He was like a very grumpy dude, but obviously he does end up turning that around, although it does go on for quite a while in this book. It's definitely not like an insta-love, insta-lust kind of thing. Like they do have attraction between them, like silent attraction, but it doesn't go into that until like later in the books. So it does give a little bit of slow burn vibes. I actually really liked Meredith in this. I thought her internal monologue was hilarious. She's very funny and also very optimistic in like the dire situation that she was in. So I really enjoyed her as a character. I also really liked the side characters in this book. I thought everybody was super sweet and nice, except obviously for like her boss, the main cowboy guy who was in charge of the farm. But everybody else was really nice, really sweet, and I just liked all the side characters. The vibes were great, super atmospheric. I loved the setting on the ranch. I loved the little shack that she was staying in, and I liked seeing that kind of turn into this cute little tiny home. That was actually one of my favorite parts about it, and I had a really good time with this book. So I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. So that's Arrogant Devil by R.S. Gray. And I will definitely be reading more of her books because the banter in here was really good. Then the next book I read was Honey by Isabel Bonta, and this is a general fiction. This one is kind of like a coming of age story following this girl named Amber, who is a very talented singer. And since she was a child, she was a very talented singer. She was discovered by an agent, and she was kind of trying to make it in the industry. She didn't actually get anywhere until she was like a little bit older. Like when she was 16, things started picking up for her. And the story just basically followed the highs and lows and how like the music industry is and just like her relationships that she's had throughout this time. And there's also like a lot of scandal and like stuff to do with the media. So I thought this was actually pretty interesting. I did enjoy the story and I liked the character. However, the writing and the storytelling in this book wasn't really my favorite. Something about it just didn't feel quite right, because when I was reading about her performing, like the story didn't go into like the highs of the performance. It just kind of like focused on the lows. So you didn't really get that payoff of like, this is all worth it. Everything that she has to go through to get where she is, it was all worth it for her because the story didn't go into the detail of her actually achieving that high in that moment. You know what I mean? I would say this is actually kind of similar to The Favorites, but in a completely different way. Obviously, we're focusing on a different talent here, but like with The Favorites, when the couple was ice skating and performing, the scene would take you to the finish line of like where you're like, okay, they did it. It all came together. You know, you have that feeling of relief, that feeling of accomplishment, that feeling of overcoming, whereas this one did not have that. It just really focused on a lot of the lows that she was experiencing, and it would like cut off or like fade to black on those scenes where you could actually see the outcome of everything that she worked for. And I personally didn't love that. I felt like it was a little bit incomplete, and so I ended up rating this one 2.5 stars and rounded up to 3 stars on Goodreads. Then the next book I picked up was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, and this one follows the main characters Alice, Hayden, and Margaret Ives. Margaret Ives is like this famous personality. She was a tabloid princess back in her day, and now she's writing a biography, but she needs an author to write this book for her because she's not a writer. And she essentially employs Alice and Hayden for a month to kind of get to know her so that she could choose the correct person to write her book, someone who will have the right voice and someone that she feels most comfortable with. So Alice and Hayden both are having like meetings with her throughout the entire month and just getting to know her so that she can figure out who she wants to choose to write her book. But they're also in the meantime starting a romance on the side. So there's like 2 plot lines happening at the same time in this book. In terms of Margaret's plot line, I thought it was pretty interesting, but it did move very slowly. I found myself quite bored at the beginning part of it, and I felt like this book overall was too long when it came to that. There were some interesting parts to her story, especially like the part with Cosmos and Claire and like her life with him and the scandal that took place there, and also her sister and the cult that she was involved in. Like, that was all very interesting to me, but everything leading up to it, I just wasn't really interested in that. In terms of the romance between Alice and Hayden, that was more of like a subplot because there really wasn't that much of it. I didn't think it was that well developed, and it started off really, really quickly, and I felt like when I was reading it, I felt like I missed how it came about. So I wasn't super invested in the romance, and I didn't feel like it was super well developed or progressed all that well either. So overall, I felt like this could have been much shorter and much more concise than it was. I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars and rounded down to 3 stars on Goodreads. Okay, then the next book I read was actually a reread of A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, and this is the first book in the saga of the Unfated series. I did a reread of this because I really, really enjoyed it the first time that I read this, and the second book had recently come out, so I had wanted to refresh my memory on this because this is kind of like a little bit more of like a complicated fantasy and a lot happens. This is based on Norse mythology, and essentially what happens is some people are granted a power from the gods, and Freya is one of those people. She has been prophesized that she will unite 2 kingdoms with her power, so whoever basically controls her power will be the next king. So she's essentially forced into a marriage with this king that wants to control all the lands, but she actually ends up having feelings and kind of like a relationship with Bjorn, who is that king's son. It's very interesting. I really, really love this book. It's very high stakes. Freya is a total badass, a huge twist in the plot that I didn't see coming the first time that I read this, and just overall a lot of twists and turns. And it does end on a cliffhanger. So second time around, loved it just as much. A few things were cleared up for me that I didn't understand the first time. And I actually also highly recommend listening to the audio on this because the audiobook narrators have these amazing accents, and I really, really enjoyed that. So this was a 5 star, same as before. I did not end up changing my rating for this. Okay. Then the next one I read was Crash Landing by Annie McQuaid. And this one follows Piper and Wyatt. And Piper, Wyatt, and their like childhood friend group were basically part of like this lonely only society that they created because they were all like only children. And so that's when Piper and Wyatt kind of like fell in love with each other when they were young, but they ended up going their separate ways. Wyatt ended up leaving the friend group, and now one of their friends is getting married, and it's a destination wedding in the Bahamas. So Piper is on her way to this wedding. However, her flight gets delayed and she has no way of getting there on time. And she ends up running into Wyatt at the airport, who apparently has secured an airplane from one one of his friends, and he's flying down there and offers to take her with him. However, as you can clearly see from this beautiful cover, they end up crashing the plane and landing on a deserted island and basically being stuck on this deserted island together. This one had really good atmospheric vibes, like very, very summery because they are on a tropical island. I really loved the setting of this book. I liked Piper as a main character. She was pretty badass. She was brave. She did brave things. She actually ended up saving Wyatt quite a few times, and I just really liked her as a main character. Wyatt, on the other hand, he could have been a little bit better. He wasn't like my favorite male main character in a book, but I did really enjoy Piper, and I liked the story and I liked the setting. This book does have the dual timelines, so it does go into the past and kind of like gives you their history and everything, and obviously in the present timeline when they're stuck on the island together. I think I enjoyed the present timeline a lot more than the past timeline. The past timeline read a little bit too YA for me, where they were like going to prom and stuff like that, and I just like didn't find myself super interested in that. But I did really enjoy the present timeline and everything that was happening on the island and them waiting for rescue and basically reconnecting, because obviously this is a second chance. So overall, I enjoyed it. I had a pretty good time. It was a very atmospheric read, great for the summertime, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Okay, then the next book I picked up was Passion Project by London Sperry, and this one follows the main characters Bennett and Henry, and Bennett basically struggles with anxiety and her boyfriend actually ends up dying, so she's going through some grief. One of her friends, in order to get her out there, she makes her like a dating profile where she meets Henry and they agree to meet for a date. However, she gets an anxiety attack and she ends up bailing on him and doesn't show up to the date. Unfortunately for her, she goes to the restaurant across the street where she ends up losing her wallet and then has to go back and retrieve it. And then it turns out that the bartender at that restaurant is actually Henry, the guy she was supposed to meet and the guy that she stood up for their date. They have a conversation and they kind of turn this into like a little bit of a friendship. Henry learns that she doesn't really have a passion, so they agree to meet every Saturday to like do fun things together so that he could help her discover her passion. I thought the plotline was actually really cute. They were actually pretty cute as characters and as a couple, but there were some moments of like weirdness and awkwardness that I didn't love, and the book did slow down quite a bit in the middle. So I did find myself getting a little bit bored during like the middle half of this book, but overall it was just okay. I didn't find myself having any like strong positive feelings or strong negative feelings about this book or the characters or the writing or the plot. So overall it was a pretty decent time, and I ended up rating this one 3 stars. Then the next book I read was Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, and I absolutely loved this one. I did post a vlog on this one and I basically rave about this book the entire time. This is actually in the running for being one of my favorite books of the year, so I highly, highly, highly recommend you pick this up. This follows Samantha and Xavier. Samantha is like a social media manager for a mustard brand, and Xavier is a veterinarian. And Samantha finds this baby kitten and she brings it to Xavier to have him examined because she needs to fly to California because her mom is sick. But Xavier finds this congenital condition that this cat has, and it's basically going to die if it doesn't get fixed, if he doesn't get surgery, and she unfortunately doesn't have the money for the surgery. So Xavier recommends that she put him down. However, Samantha is not having that. She is determined to raise the money for this surgery and get this cat the surgery, which she ends up doing. So when she brings him back to Xavier to look at again, they end up having more conversations and end up going on this date together, which is like this amazing date. The connection that these two share is so good. The way that Abby Jimenez writes is just amazing. She puts so much feeling and emotion behind her words, and I absolutely loved this book. I loved everything about this book. She also did a great job of portraying real life hardships that these characters had to overcome in order to be together, and I thought she just did an incredible job with that. So I ended up rating this one 6 stars and obviously 5 stars on Goodreads, but this was amazing. I absolutely loved it. Then the next book I picked up was The Wrong Quarterback by C.R. Jane, and this is a dark rom-com, and it's the first book in the Wrong Players series. There is a second book, I think it's out already, but I will definitely be reading that because this was actually really, really funny. It follows the main characters Casey and Parker, and Casey goes to college and Parker is the quarterback on the football team at that college. They meet through a childhood friend who's also on the football team, but Parker has like this weird like obsession at first sight, maybe love at first sight with Casey, and his POV is actually kind of hilarious. I really loved being in Parker's head. His inner monologue was hilarious. I loved like the dad jokes between the friend group. It was just really, really funny in general. There's also like some light stalking going on, and there's also also like a turn at the end where I completely did not expect it. At first, I was like, this doesn't really read like a dark romance, but the twist at the end kind of puts it in that category, I would say. But leading up to that, I would say this is kind of similar to like Lights Out, where it's like a stalker romance, but still kind of comical, still kind of funny. I actually listened to this on audio as well as did an immersive read, and I ended up actually meeting the audiobook narrator, Alexis Page, who narrates this book, and she ended up signing the book for me, which I thought was really, really nice. I really thought that this was great. I loved the banter and like the funny moments and just like being in Parker's head. I thought it was hilarious. So overall, I had a pretty good time with this one, and I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. And then the last book that I read in May is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this one has been sitting on my shelf for quite a while. So I'm very happy that I finally read it. This was really, really good. It's kind of like a documentary style, interview style of like this band from the 60s or 70s, I think. And essentially it follows the main character, Daisy, who is a very talented natural singer, but she has a passion for songwriting. And she's kind of being pushed into singing her own songs. So her managers basically push her into joining this band, The Six, so that they could like mutually benefit each other. And Billy is the lead singer of The Six. It follows all their dramas and like the scandals and everything of like this band living the band life and being on the road and like the things that come up, and some of the other members of the band like Karen, whom I really, really loved. This book definitely surprised me. There was a lot that happened that I wasn't expecting. A lot of times the opposite of what I was expecting would happen, and it was actually like a pleasant surprise. And also in terms of like the highs and the lows of like them being on stage and singing, this book actually gave you that like Honey did not. You know, like how Honey was kind of like missing those moments. This book actually had a lot of those moments, and I really appreciated that because their story actually came full circle. So I had a really good time with this one. It was a super fast read, being that it was like kind of like interview style, documentary style, and the dialogue just makes it move really, really quickly. So I had a really good time, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. So these are all the May books. Now let's get into my June stats. For the month of June, I read 8 books, which totaled 3,274 pages. 6 of those were romance, 1 was a dark romance, and 1 was a fantasy. The first book I read in June was Set Piece by Lana Schwartz, and this one follows CJ and Jack. And 5 years ago, CJ was a bartender and Jack was an actor, and he comes into her bar and basically she like saves him from like a swarm of women trying to like, you know, get with him or whatever. And so they kind of like connect a little bit, and then they end up hooking up as like a one-night stand. Now, fast forward, CJ is now a set designer for movies and Jack is still an actor, and he gets cast to be in one of the movies that she's a set designer for. So then they reconnect. Overall, this wasn't my favorite. It felt very underdeveloped. Like there wasn't much happening in the plot, and a lot of the plot points I thought would get developed kind of didn't get developed, and they were kind of like glazed over. So I felt like there was a lot of missed opportunities with this book. I just didn't have any feelings about like the plot line or anything that was really happening between these characters, and it kind of felt like I was reading an outline. Like the writing was not very emotional. It was kind of like very basic, and there wasn't really very much feeling or emotion behind anything. It's supposed to be kind of like inspired by the movie Notting Hill, but I don't honestly remember if I've ever even watched that movie, so that didn't really mean anything to me. But overall, this is another one that I didn't really have any strong positive or negative feelings towards. It was kind of like a middle of the road, and I ended up rating this one 2.5 stars. Then the next book I picked up was Till Summer Do Us Part by Megan Quinn, and this one was hilarious. I had such a great time with this book. It basically follows the main character, Scotty, who works for a golf company, and she's like the only woman with like all these men, and everybody at the company has like this marriage first mentality where all these guys are married and they're happily married and they have families and stuff like that. But then the one woman that she looks up to, who's essentially her boss, comes into town, and in a meeting, just like kind of like spur of the moment, she ends up lying and saying that she is in fact married as well because she wants to fit in with like the company culture. And then she gets called out for not wearing a ring. So in order to cover up that lie, she comes up with another lie and tells her boss that her and her husband are having problems right now. Unfortunately for her, her boss's husband is like a marriage counselor, and she basically coerces her into them going to see this marriage counselor. However, Scotty doesn't have a husband and she doesn't have anybody to stand in. But luckily for her, her best friend's friend's brother agrees to do it, and his name is Wilder, and he's like this kind of like free-spirited guy. He's kind of funny, he's super positive, and he kind of has like this mentality of going with the flow. So he agrees to go to this marriage counseling session with her, and somehow they end up signing up for like this couples retreat that all her coworkers are actually going to be at as well. So this is like a hilarious fake marriage situation, a couples retreat kind of like camp setting, and everything that happens in this book is actually hilarious, and I love these main characters and the banter and just every single moment that happened in this book. I absolutely loved it. Megan Quinn was actually in town, and I did actually get to meet her, and she did end up signing my book, which I absolutely loved. This is actually the Barnes & Noble illustrated edition of this book, and there's actually quite a few illustrations in this copy, and she was talking about like the guy who does the illustrations for her. His name is Gerard, and all the back and forth that they go through. I thought it was super interesting, very funny, and she's just great overall. I did end up getting a few of her other books signed as well, which I'm very happy about. But back to this book, I absolutely loved it. I had such a great time with it. I actually laughed out loud so much during this book. I loved Wilder, I loved Scotty, and I just basically loved the camp and the camp setting and everything that was going on there. It was hilarious. Everything about it was hilarious, and the writing was excellent. So I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. Then the next book I read was One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune, and this one follows the main characters Alice and Charlie. And Alice's grandmother has a hip replacement, and so Alice agrees to kind of take care of her because she's the only one who has the time in her family to do so. So she takes her to Barry's Bay. Alice has vacationed in Barry's Bay before, and she ended up taking this photo of this like yellow speedboat, which is actually what's pictured on this cover. And this photo is what propelled her career into being a photographer. So she has very fond memories of Barry's Bay. And so her and her grandmother go to Barry's Bay to do her recovery there because it's like a nice calm setting. And that's where she meets Charlie, who is kind of like the groundskeeper in the area. And he kind of like fixes up the cabin and everything so that it's conducive for her grandmother to recover there. Charlie is very funny. He's kind of like a very lighthearted, fun-loving guy, which I really liked. And the two of them kind of like strike up a romance a little bit. It felt a little off to me in the sense that there were a lot of scenes of Alice kind of trying to convince Charlie to be with her and him rejecting her, and then eventually he like came around to it. But I will say I was turned off by that fact just a little bit when it came to this book. There is a twist at the end that I definitely wasn't expecting, and overall it is a very emotional read as well. There's like a lot of emotion behind the writing, which I did really enjoy. So I had a pretty good time with this one. I liked the writing. It was very atmospheric with the lake setting and everything, and overall I would say it's a very good summer read. I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Then the next book I read was Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry, and this is her fantasy or romantasy debut, and I absolutely loved this one. This is one that I vlogged in my random number generator, chooses the number of pages I read, and this one was amazing. This follows the main character Odessa, who is a princess, and her sister was actually betrothed to the king of like a different land of Tura, and her father hired the king of Tura's army to kill these marrow wheels, which are like monsters in the water. And he thought that he had killed 6, but he actually killed 7. And then they decided to invoke something called the Treaty of Seven, which means that the king can then choose a bride prize for himself. And so instead of choosing her sister, which he had originally been betrothed to, he chooses Odessa as his bride prize. And then they end up traveling back to his land. This book was so interesting, so atmospheric in terms of like the different places that they go to. Like, for example, they travel via ships, which was totally giving Pirates of the Caribbean to me. And then they travel via land on horseback, and it was totally giving like Game of Thrones and like Khaleesi and the Dothraki. And one of the towns that they go to is Trio, which is essentially like what's pictured here on the end paper. And it's just like a town of tree houses in the forest. And I just absolutely loved it. So the atmospheric vibes in this, top notch. I was saying in my vlog that I really wish this was a movie, and I guess there is something in the works for this being a movie because like the setting of this book is just incredible, and I literally cannot wait to watch this movie if this ever does become a movie. So this was incredible. The writing was incredible. I absolutely loved the writing. I loved the characters. I loved the twists and turns. There were so many like unexpected things that happened at the end, and like just shocking things that I totally was not expecting. And I just literally had the best time with this book. So obviously I gave this one 5 stars. It's going down as one of my top reads of the year. Then the next one I read also in that vlog was Sounds Like Love by Ashley Pawson, and this one follows follows Joni and Sebastian, and Joni is a songwriter and Sebastian is a musician. And they end up kind of like getting caught on a kiss cam backstage somewhere, but her mom actually has dementia and she ends up moving to South Carolina to take care of her. And while she's doing that, she discovers this voice in her head. It's kind of like a magical realism where now her and Sebastian have like this magical mind connection where they can read each other's thoughts and hear music coming from the other person's head. And they end up using that to kind of like write this song together, which is really, really interesting. And the concept of this is really, really good. However, I felt like this was kind of a missed opportunity because I love telepathic connections in books and like that kind of like level of intimacy. But these two people kind of ended up turning that into more of a friendship instead of a romance, which I felt was a little bit lacking. The writing was still really, really good and the story was beautiful and the concept of this was really, really good. So I did enjoy it overall, but I just wished that the romance part with the telepathic connection would have been developed a little bit better or maybe gone a different way. It does end up getting there in the end, but I just wish that the story progressed a little bit differently, I would say. So overall, I had a pretty good time. I liked the writing and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Then the next book I read was Dear Reader by Tate James, and this is the first book in the Devil's Backbone series. I think this might be a trilogy, but the second book just recently came out, which I did order it and I will definitely be reading that soon. But this is essentially a Why Choose, which to be honest with you, Why Choose is probably not my favorite. This is the first Why Choose that I have read so far and I didn't hate it, but I also didn't really love it that much. So essentially this book follows the main character Ashley, who is a masseuse and she's going into a grad program at this very prestigious university. Her stepbrother is also at that same school and he's actually part of this secret society, which she then kind of gets indoctrinated into. And in that society, there's also these other members that she meets and she ends up having like a little bit of a relationship with this guy Heath and then this other guy Carter, and just like different things happen to her while she's just kind of having like relationships with these people. The secret society atmosphere is very cool. I think this would actually be a pretty good fall read because there's like some spooky aspects to it and some mystery to it, which I thought was very interesting. And overall, I had a pretty good time, but I wouldn't say that I absolutely loved it. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars. Okay. Then the next one I read was Savor It by Tara DeWitt, and this is the first book in the Spoons Oregon series. And I absolutely love this one. This one follows Sage and Fisher, and Sage lives in Spoons and she's kind of had like a little bit of a hard life. She has this mentality of like savoring every moment and like loving life and really appreciating the simple things in life. And she's also a school teacher and she basically fosters like all these farm animals, which I thought was so, so sweet. And then Fisher, he is a chef and he comes to Spoons to basically like set up this new restaurant that they're opening there. And he's essentially supposed to like help with the launch. And they end up being next door neighbors. Fisher is also the guardian of his niece Indy, and they essentially move to Spoons and they're next door to Sage, and basically the rest is history. This book was so sweet. It brought me to tears in some moments. It was so like heartwarming and heartfelt. I just loved the characters. I loved Sage's mentality. I loved the animals and I loved her garden and like everything that happened there. I thought it was so sweet and heartfelt and heartwarming and just like generally wholesome. So I had a great time with this one. I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. And then the final book I read in June was A Mile High by Liz Tom Ford, and this is the first book in the Windy City series. This one wasn't my favorite, honestly, and I did hear this review from other people as well that they say that because these books are interconnected, you could probably skip this one, but since I had it, I decided to just go ahead and read it. But this essentially follows Stevie and Xander's, and Stevie is a flight attendant and Xander's is a player on the hockey team. And she works on the private plane that the hockey team uses to travel from city to city during the hockey season. They definitely don't get off to a good start. She doesn't really like him. She thinks he's kind of arrogant and rude, which I thought so too. I didn't really like him very much at the beginning or throughout the entire book, honestly, because Xander's is kind of like this player and he hooks up with a lot of women and he just seemed like really, really arrogant, whereas Stevie is a soft-hearted, kind of insecure girl and she basically like struggles with her weight and she's got like some insecurity involving that. So I thought she was a pretty well-rounded character. However, Xander's just wasn't doing it for me. I kind of didn't find myself liking him throughout the book, and I feel like a lot of people who read this feel the same. But we do get introduced to Ryan and Indy, who are side characters. Ryan is Stevie's brother, who's on a basketball team, I think, and Indy is the other flight attendant that works with her. So I am excited for their book because they seemed like actually like genuine characters, and I actually like them as characters. And I think the second book in the series is actually going to be their book, so I'm excited to read that. But overall, I wouldn't say that this was my favorite. I did like Stevie a lot. I liked the writing and I liked the plot of this book, but I just didn't really like Xander's very much. And that's kind of what brought the rating down for this book for me, because I ended up rating this one 3 stars. So that's the final book for June. And before I get into July, I think I'm going to take a break and maybe film the rest of this video tomorrow, because it is getting kind of dark outside and I don't know if my lighting is very good. So I will be back in a split second for you and we will talk about my July wrap up. Good morning, guys. I'm back. So let's finish off with my July wrap up and get into my July stats. So during the month of July, I read 7 books, and that was a total of 3,175 pages. 2 of them were fantasy, 3 were romance, and 2 were dark romance. The first book that I read in the month of July was Left of Forever by Tara DeWitt, and this one I absolutely loved. I vlogged this in my summer reading vlog, and I absolutely raved about this book because this book was amazing. And this is definitely in the running for top book of the year, along with the Abby Jimenez book that I mentioned earlier. I just absolutely love this. This is the second book in the Spoons Oregon kind of like interconnected standalone series by Tara DeWitt. The first one is Savor It, which I just talked about for last month, and I continued reading the series. I heard amazing things about this book. That's why I wanted to pick it up, and the reviews weren't lying. This was amazing. This follows Wren and Ellis Bird, and Wren is Sage's best friend from Savor It, and Ellis is her ex-husband because they're divorced. They've been divorced for 5 years or something, and this is a second chance romance. Essentially, they both feel like they're not quite done with each other because they fell in love very young, ended up getting divorced, had a child together, but they still have those lingering feelings about the other person, and there's just like a lot of unresolved stuff that they're holding on to, and they just essentially feel like they're not quite done with each other yet. So they take this trip after they drop off their son Sam at college just to kind of reconnect a little bit and see if they could potentially make it work. And the whole thing is just amazing. Like, the writing is so beautiful, so emotional. I actually tabbed and underlined quite a few quotes in here. If you want to see those, definitely check out that blog. I just absolutely loved the story. I loved the characters. I loved the writing. I loved all the emotion behind it. Everything about this book was perfection. So this was a definite 6-star read. Second one of the year, which is crazy, but I'm not mad about it because I absolutely loved this book. So this was 6 stars, Left of Forever by Tara DeWitt, and that was our first book of July. Then I picked up Fearless by Lauren Roberts. This is the 3rd book in the Powerless series, and it continues the story of Peyton and Kit and Kai. But this one I felt was very similar to the first 2 books. There is really good tension and pining, and the writing is pretty good, but I did find it to be a little bit repetitive. There were a few moments in like flashbacks to her friend. If you have not read the series, I'm not going to mention who it is, but those moments did kind of make me tear up a little bit, and I thought it was a pretty good end to the series, but I didn't think it was anything phenomenal. This is a young adult fantasy though, so I kind of expected it to be as it was, but again, it just felt a little bit repetitive to me, and I didn't find myself caring all that much about like what happens in this book. But overall, I thought it was a pretty good conclusion to the series as a whole. I did find out that there is actually another novella coming out. I think it's called Fearful, so I will read that as well. I thought this was going to be the very end of the series, but I guess there's like still one more novella, so I guess it's not quite over yet. So I'm not really sure about the structure of the series, but I will be reading that one as well because I do find this series pretty interesting. It's just not like super captivating because I do find it a little bit repetitive. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars. Then the next book I picked up was Beautiful Venom by Rena Kent, and this is a dark romance, and it's the first book in the Vipers series. And essentially this follows the main character Dahlia, who's had a very hard life. Her parents died young, and she essentially grew up with her foster sister Violet, going through like different foster homes or something, and they've become very close, and she's basically the only person that she cares about. And then suddenly something happens to Violet, and now she's in a coma, and Dahlia wants to basically figure out what happened to her and who's responsible for it, because in her journal or in her diary, she learns that one of the hockey players on the Viper team is part of this secret society that apparently is responsible for what happened to her. So she tries to infiltrate this secret society. And so she decides that Kane, who is the team captain, is the least unhinged of all of the hockey players. And so she basically like uses him to get herself initiated into the secret society, which, you know, she does. This one wasn't my favorite in the sense that it does have a lot of triggers. However, I will say that like I don't usually mind violence in dark romance. Obviously, that's kind of a given for a lot of dark romances. However, I don't prefer it to be between the 2 main characters. And I think that's the thing about this that I didn't like the most, is that it was just so much between the two main characters and I couldn't get into the story very much. Although I will say that this was definitely a page turner and I really liked the plot of this story and like where it was going and the mystery surrounding everything that was happening. I think the second book is Violet's story and I would definitely be interested in reading that because she is a character that really like captured my interest. So I might be continuing with this series, but I won't necessarily say that I liked this first book, and I ended up rating this one 2.5 stars. Okay, so then the next book I picked up was Problematic Summer Romance by Ali Hazelwood, and this is the second book in the Not in Love Interconnected Standalones, and this one follows Maya and Connor. Maya is the younger sister of Eli from Not in Love from the first book, and Connor is Eli's co-worker or like co-owner of the company that they own, and this is like an age gap romance. So essentially what happens is there's two timelines. There's the current timeline and then there's the past timeline. And in the past timeline, when Maya was in college, she essentially found out that her boyfriend was cheating with her roommate. And so she called Eli for emotional support. Eli wasn't available and Connor answered the phone and kind of like helped her through it. Also ended up coming to her rescue a little bit, which I thought was really, really sweet. And so that's kind of like where her crush for him developed. And then the same thing happened to him where he also kind of like started having a little bit of feelings for her at that time as well. But they had always kept their distance because he always felt weird about the age gap. It's like a 15-year age gap between them. So he always felt weird about it. He's very principled. He didn't really want that stigma around him, I guess. And so he always kind of like kept his distance from her. But in the present timeline, she kind of like wants to revisit that relationship and, you know, essentially like give it a go. It did take him a little bit of time to be convinced to actually like give it a go with her. And that wasn't my favorite thing about this book. But I will say that it wasn't quite as cringeworthy as I had expected it to be going into this book. And I did really like Maya as a character because I found her to be very hilarious and like her inner monologue was just really, really funny to me. So I did enjoy them as characters and I did enjoy the story. So overall, I would say I really liked the book and I liked the story and it was a really good summer read. This is another one that I vlogged in my summer reading vlog, so go ahead and check that out for full thoughts. But I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Then the next book I picked up was Never Been Shipped by Alicia Thompson, and this is also an author that was in the Austin area, and she came for a book signing when this book actually came out. So I did go and see her and get my book signed by her. It also came with this cute little picture, and she did end up signing my book along with a couple of other books by her that I also have, but I really, really enjoyed seeing her. Ali Hazelwood was also moderating the event, so I got to see Ali Hazelwood again, and that was really, really fun. I love their dynamic on stage. She was really, really funny and they had a really good banter going back and forth. So I really enjoyed seeing her. And I also really enjoyed this book. This book follows Micah and John, and when they were young, they started a band. As they got older, the band wasn't super successful. They only had one song that was like very successful. It was kind of like a one-hit wonder, but then the band ended up breaking up because Micah decided that she wanted to go solo. Unfortunately, none of their careers really progressed after that happened, and so everybody was kind of stagnant and a little bit resentful of Micah for breaking up the band essentially. But their one-hit wonder song did actually get popular on this like Teen Wolf show. And so now in the current timeline, that Teen Wolf show is having like a themed cruise happening, kind of like a reuniting of like the Teen Wolf, whatever cast it was. And so their managers actually invited the band to also come and play on the cruise. So it's kind of like their reuniting tour. And there was just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of drama between the band members. And I thought it was really, really entertaining. I really liked the writing of this. Her writing is actually very similar to Ali Hazelwood writing, where there's like a lot of like humor intertwined in it. And it's just like a fast-paced, fun read. There were also a lot of emotional aspects to this, especially between Micah and John. And I really liked their relationship. They're like a friend to lovers kind of situation. I always love a good friends to lovers, and their shared passion for music was really, really sweet. So I really enjoyed this one and I rated this one 4 stars. The next book I picked up was Rook and Rebel by Kate Crew, and this is the first book in the Mavericks series, I think. However, this isn't actually available to buy anymore because I think it's getting republished, like it got picked up for traditional publishing coming in January. So I think you have to wait a little bit if you do want to read this, but this is a dark rom-com. And it follows Rook and Regan, and basically his little nickname for her is Rebel, so that's why it's called Rook and Rebel. Essentially how this starts off is Regan is dating this guy, and he's not a great guy. He takes her down a dark alley, essentially to show her something, but they end up getting mugged by Rook on a motorcycle, and he's kind of like a part of like a motorcycle crew, and Rook is actually trying to chase him down for some money that he owes him, and the guy, being the upstanding guy that he is, decides to just take a run for it and basically leaves her behind in the dark alley with their mugger. So somehow they get to talking, and Rook ends up giving her a ride home on his motorcycle. There's a little bit of attraction between them. It's really, really quite funny, to be honest with you. There's also like a little bit of stalking going on, but I wouldn't consider this to be very, very dark. This is a lot closer to like Lights Out, but maybe even lighter than that. Overall, I thought the plot was pretty good. I liked the story, and I really liked how funny it was. And I also liked the main characters. But besides the humor infused in this, I don't think there was anything about it that particularly stood out. So I still had a pretty good time. It was a really fast read, and it's actually pretty short as well. So I would recommend reading this if you are a fan of dark rom-coms when you're actually able to get this. But I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars. And then the final book I read in July was A Soul to Keep by Opal Rain. And this is the first book in the Dustwalker Bride series, and this one I absolutely love. This is a monster romance. It follows Rhea and Orpheus, and this is like a world where demons exist and dustwalkers exist, and dustwalkers are apparently different than demons. But essentially, when she was a young child, her family was killed by demons, and she was the only one who survived. And so her little town essentially doesn't understand why she wasn't also killed, and they basically shun her because they believe that she is the harbinger of bad omens. So she ends up having to live like on the outskirts of town. She doesn't really, get to participate in the town or have any friends or anything like that, okay? So she's basically just secluded completely. Every 10 years, a dustwalker comes to the town requiring a bride in exchange for his protection of the town so that the town doesn't get attacked by demons. And one of his requirements is that the bride needs to be like a willing participant. So the town basically decides that Rhea is going to be his bride, and she basically gets coerced into it because otherwise they basically threaten to put her in a dungeon if she doesn't do it. So she goes, not super willingly, but she does go, and he takes her to like his land of the demons and the dead, essentially to be his bride. Honestly, I absolutely loved this book. I really loved Orpheus. He was hilarious. He was so sweet. He was a golden retriever. He cared about her so much. He had like such deep emotions. Like, I freaking loved this book. I definitely didn't expect to like this. I never thought that I would be a monster romance girly, but here we are. So I loved this one. This was a 5-star read, and I will definitely be continuing this series. So that was the final book of July. I ended up reading 25 books in these 3 months, and I think I made pretty good progress on my physical TBR, although the physical TBR is growing, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Let's just be proud of our accomplishment and celebrate reading 25 books. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you have made it this far in the video, please leave me a monster emoji down in the comments below for one of our new favorite books, A Soul to Keep. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.